and Purnendu. Maybe everyone can switch on the camera of theirs. Okay, cool. So yeah, what I would like to do is actually a little bit compare solar to wind. So what are the lessons we've learned from them? Because of course wind has been facing quite some issues. I just looked up the numbers. It was quite interesting. In 2014, I think global solar installations reached 100 gigawatts, and I think 1 year later, in 2015, wind crossed also that threshold. They installed 108. The difference is that solar will, depending on who you believe, install this year between 350 and 400 gigawatts, and wind was constantly just going up, and wind basically went down under 100 gigawatts for basically the last decade, and is just supposed to get over the threshold of 100 gigawatts this year again. So we talk about 4 times larger solar market in terms of capacity to wind. There's some reasons for that. They have been facing quite some issues, and solar, of course, is also facing more and more issues because our speed looks continuing. And so maybe as a first question quickly to the topic to set the scene. So what are for each of you the 3 obstacles you are seeing today for building solar power plants? So just three words, huh? And then we dive into the discussion. Maybe Eva, you want to continue?
Yeah, I think, well, I will just strengthen my my topic before, but permitting procedure also, maybe because I'm French, but which is mostly linked to public acceptance and public opinion, and also France is a very good example to tackle this challenge, because we are a country with shifting hard on this energy mix. Okay, renewable were not really on the top of the agenda. Now it is. So we just recently realized this big shift. And of course, everybody is very attentive to public opinion. Most of the two things I could say as a solution. So we have to increase.
Let's do solutions later. Just the 3:
okay.
Permitting, and what are the other 2 you see? As
public acceptance. Yeah.
Okay, Stefan.
Grid number 1, grid number 2, grid number 3. So let's be clear. I mean, we live in a dynamic world. We know we have people issues from time to time. You talked a bit about permits, products, but I think all this is somehow manageable. But the grid it's a different world. They need much, much longer to enhance the grid. So my issue is grid, all the 3.
Okay, Purnendu.
Yeah, so grid, of course, is there, but yeah, I mean, from India perspective, I think the biggest challenge is land acquisition. Land is something that we are finding a bit challenging. The other is that price volatility of modules. I'm talking about the solar deployments, right? And final, I think, is the access to long-term affordable financing. Financing, I mean, at a cheaper rate. That is getting a bit challenging these days.
Very interesting. So we see different regions, different challenges, and so let's maybe talk about permitting, because I think maybe it's a little bit European centric, but of course, when we had the energy crisis here, I think the message was we were getting from administrations, somehow solar was on the table, I think, or on the radars, and which hasn't been, at least to that extent, for quite a while. And then they said, okay, you have to deliver now. We don't get any gas from Russia anymore. It's not only about power, it's also about heating, electrification of everything, very quickly get it done. And so they also were very fast in Brussels to create some emergency measures. And then also this included some permitting accelerators that were also quickly passed and theoretically should have been also implemented by the different member states. So I think this is maybe to Eva and Stefan. So how much of that have you been seeing? How much faster is it now going to with permitting in Europe?
I believe not at all, because I think it's a nice and political idea to talk about this and speeding up the processes. And I think it is a political statement, which is important. But let us be clear, especially in Germany, the local federal community decides about the building permit. And if you are in the southern part of Erfurt, let's say, in the eastern part of Germany, where is a small community and there are two people in the building authorities and one guy has long COVID and the other guy is on holiday, there is no reaction, yeah, and we still have to fax things. So, so probably some people who are here a bit younger, you can Google a bit what a fax is, yeah. So, I think the federal the decision process has advantages, because if you are in the community, if you are in a hearing, then I think there are a lot of positive things, and people can decide something. But finally, it is also a bottleneck. So it's a bit I would say a two-side issue.
Okay. Eva, did you see any changes? Actually, you are also, of course, active at Solar Power Europe on the lobbying front.
I agree that I think the main challenge for all European laws now is the implementation and transposition in the member states. Okay, they have been very fast with the Green Deal package, including energy transition. But we are not yet there in member states, and I know that European Commission is really aware about that. And I completely agree with the fact also that it is local. The French last deployment is very interesting to observe because they are trying to institutionalize and regulate this process to accelerate and mapping the areas. Clearly, the focus is on local authorities, but there is pro and cons. Okay, so this is sure that it has to be local, but at the same time, we are giving such a responsibility to people who are already overwhelmed with so much topic, who are understaffed. With low means, and also this is a lot of knowledge to be acquired. So there is no movement of data collection from national institutions to be transferred to local authorities, but you can't learn about everything on our sector, which is very technical, complex, in a short period of time. So we addressed the European Commission that we were quite worried about this compatibility between mapping, spatial mapping with go-to areas, which could lead to no go-to areas, and this is the worst case scenario. But also, for the moment, we don't see acceleration because the people who has to implement, they're not ready. So we'll see in the future, but for the moment, it's not that obvious.
Because I think in the end, actually, the deadlines were not so bad. So permitting process no longer than 12 months for systems up to 50 megawatts and 18 months for systems up to 50 megawatts. But it's not that you went basically to the administrations, local administration, said, hey guys, can you please?
I mean, the law is super good, but it's theoretical. Okay, so now we need implementation and efficiency. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel the same. No? So I think it's a good idea again, but in reality, the development timeline is getting longer and longer. So I think if in France, 3-4 years is quite normal. Germany is moving into 3 years, I would say, and this is also an issue.
Okay. Wow.
And just to say that it's very important, as you said at the beginning, to focus on the land, access to land and access to grid, because most of the time what we see, it's you have local authorities, but you also have agricultural chamber that have to give an approval for agricultural land. and green connection for them is something very far and not into consideration. So that's very important to underline this. Yeah.
Okay, Purnendu, how do you look at that with your Indian experience, actually? So you didn't mention permitting at all under your 4 topics, but I think in India things can also take sometimes time. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, so in India, things are a bit different. So this permitting process is quite Europe-centric, right? So in India, we don't have a very structured permitting process for deployment of renewable plants, solar plants or wind plants. So what we have is like for land, we have different regulations, right? And for access to the grid. So what I think India did fairly well is in terms of arranging access or arranging evacuation for all these RE plants, because we have a legacy of very robust transmission grid, with a lot of redundant capacity from the thermal times, and those were utilized during the initial days of renewable energy deployment. Later on, we planned very structured, very nice green energy corridors from the renewable rich areas to the load centers. And that was a bit of foresightedness that was shown by the planners. For land, what we did is in every province of India, every state of India, we have a nodal agency which was given the task of allotting these government lands to different developers who will identify the land and then apply for that allotment of land. So all these processes, and apart from that, there was free transmission which was given. So all these initiatives, even tax holidays that were given by the government. So all these conducive regulatory interventions taken by the government that did quite well for the at least solar to flourish. Wind, we have this defense clearance which was to be taken, which was a bit tactical, but for solar there was not a big challenge as such, as far as permitting is concerned.
Okay, let's talk about the grid, because Stefan's that was all about his issues. And Stefan, you are also active with Enerparc in India. Is there anything Europe can learn from India about grid expansion?
Yeah, I think the good thing is, and at the moment, to be honest, our developments in India are the fastest one. Yeah, because the government is in generally quite pragmatic. And the reason is probably different. I always say every country has a bit its own style why they want to have renewables. But in India, and you know this better than me, you need energy. Yeah, right. And energy is political, and political means election and so on. So there is a different storyboard behind it. So when you speak to the nodal agencies or to the local grid operators, they always make thumbs up. Is it always the right process? It's a different story. But can you convince things to do faster? Yeah. So at the moment, our developments in India are the fastest one in our whole organization. It's weird. So it's a bit different.
But what can we learn actually from this?
Yeah, is it pragmatism? But to be honest, I think in France and in France and in Germany, you cannot change these bureaucracy idea, these processes. You have to follow this and that. And again, even if the European Union or if the government says we want to make it faster, in reality, it is always really at the ground. This is the decision makers. If there's a community who want to be part of the energy transition, then things will go up quite fast. But all these people in the authority, they don't want to do something wrong. And I think this is a bit the issue which I see.
But does it mean that does this lead actually already to public acceptance? Because if those people understand how important renewables are and what it can bring maybe also for the community, that this helps actually of accelerating things in general.
And on one hand, yes, but Michael, I think you and I, we talk a lot about how we can learn from each other in the European Union. I mean, we have now the concession fees in Germany where the government or the local community gets from day one when we generate energy gets money, and it's not less. And I think we were the first one who, the industry, the first one who loved to pay something, because this increased the acceptance. Do you have this in Portugal? No. Do you have in France the solar tax? Yeah, great. Yeah. So is there, I would say, other issues like in the Netherlands where you have the community participation? It's good, but super complicated. It takes super long. So I think acceptance is for sure the key. But the way how you establish this is probably the answer. And I think this is, I'm looking to you now and to other players in the international associations so that we can really bring it down to the community.
But and how much do these best practice guidelines help? So eva showed some, I think in Germany, there's also one from the Association of New Energy with a self-declaration document. So does that help actually if companies sign that?
I think it's not useless. Let's be clear, no? But I think for example, the association BNE who published whatever the guideline of good practice, I think this helps in a very simple way to explain what does it mean biodiversity, what does it mean a good system, what does it mean community integration, and so on. This is only 5, 6, 7 pages. It's not complicated. I think this helps more to bring the information down. I think it doesn't help if politicians says we will shorten the building permits because they have no impact on this. This is no influence. So let's say to increase the awareness, this is, I think, for all these things, this helps. This is very clear.
Are you also seeing that, Eva, in France with these best practices? So how are politicians reacting to that? And how is the industry reacting to that? That's also the question. Because if you look at how many companies actually have implemented that and are following that, so I also wonder how big or how much they embrace that.
Mm. To be honest, it's very difficult to evaluate. I can just give my opinion on a global perspective, working for several years for this sector now. What we see, it's an increase. We can say everything, we can be critical, but I mean, the objective we have now and the presence of solar energy and renewable energy in general is increasing. So that's a success. We have to achieve this energy transition to keep dynamic and positive. It's important and always also tricky in the communication management to stay positive because there is huge shift, there is huge step that achieved just several years ago. We were not at the front page like this, and nobody was talking about renewable, or when it was talking about renewable, just to critics. So there is a huge evolution, but of course there is a lot to do, and I think the panelists here identify a lot of bottlenecks to be leveraged. And everybody agree that we need to intensify the communication, to raise the awareness. Also, I think we are at the era of communication and we need to be specific. So those best practices are good because sometimes we have a communication which is very theoretical with a lot of ideology. And finally, when you go on the technical aspect, people are not nuts, huh? Okay, they can understand. And finally, at the end, people, yeah, they agree and they accept. I also agree on the fact that communication is a huge point. It's not everything. Regulation might help, but I think we need to be cautious because no, it's like an overwhelming regulation process. Okay, that's like we are shifting from nothing to too much. So we need to find the perfect balance because we need to let also the intelligence of the market players to be, and not processize everything in all the details. And at the end, price is also very important.
And I think this brings me maybe to India again. So I think because Purnendu, you said, of course, land is an issue. India is one of the biggest countries in the world, but on the other hand, also one of the most densely populated countries in the world. People would not think about that necessarily when they think about India, but I think it's one of the top 10 countries in terms of population densities with over 500 people in average living on a square kilometer. That's huge. I think you hardly have that in Europe. Huh?
Yeah.
And so land is so precious. So that means we have to think about agri-PV. We have to think about dual use, like floating PV, and at the same time about sustainability. So how much is this? How much do people accept that these ideas in India? Because of course, cost is a huge topic, and we've seen that in the really nice modeling from electric, how much it can differ actually on what you do.
In fact, just to tackle this, because land is a precious thing over here, and so we started with this concept of solar parks, where a lot of park area, they were identified across the country, and they had been given assistance, financial assistance from the central government, and what we call CFA over here. And they had been given the responsibility of not only acquiring land, but also creating the local evacuation infrastructure, roads, water, everything. So that solar park model has been partially successful in the country. Like we planned for around 30-40 gigawatt, but right now we had been able to deploy close to around 10 to 12 gigawatts of solar park, cumulative, 2.5 gigawatts of solar park here and there. So that was one model that government tried. Recently, of course, what you said, like agri PV and floating PV is something which is gaining a lot of importance. Though floating, it's very initial stage, and but initial few biddings have taken place and few deployments have also taken place in floating park. Agri PV is to pick up. Right now, there are a lot of discussions which are going on. A lot of learnings on that aspect is being taken from Europe. I think a lot of German delegation, they came to India and they shared their experiences in agri PV, and hopefully we'll have some major deployments in agri PV part. Government is formulating some regulations around it. And the good part with India is like there are states which are very good in solar intensity, but they are having large chunk of arid lands which are non-agricultural. Like Rajasthan, we have that wasteland which was primarily used for this solar deployment. So in western part of India, in Rajasthan, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, Bikaner, all these areas, you'll find huge solar deployment, and those lands, they were utterly useless earlier, and they had become quite valuable because of these solar deployments. So those kind of buy-ins have taken place, and so now so all the available land is gradually getting filled up. So maybe in the days to come we will have some paucity of land. So we are trying to see, because wind is also facing a lot of challenges. So we'll see how it pans out. But yeah, of course, land is an issue, and government is trying to handle it properly. Agricultural land is a bit sacrosanct. Agricultural to non-agricultural conversion is a big challenge. In India, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, let's talk about quickly once again about cost, because of course it's also about of competition, and then of course it's nice if we have our solar only tenders or technology specific tenders, but if you have to really compete against others, and I think then and the boundary conditions are not clearly set, then you can only do so much. Stefan, if you kind of participate in a German regular tender, how much of these good practice from BNE actually you can apply to such a plant?
I would say a lot, because these are two different things. No? One is the tender, and the tender is only location, grid size, and price. But the building permit has nothing to do with this tender. The building permit is locally, and this depends on the natural conservation teams, on the community hearings, and if they say, no, we don't want to have it so high, please make it lower because there is a horse riding trap around this, something like this. So for every project, you develop an own plan, how to increase biodiversity, how to make it nicer, how to integrate people, and so on. And this is really a lot of information, and that's the reason why it helps to guide these the local community with this piece of paper, all the decision makers. So I think this is good.
Okay. And if you participate in tenders, actually, because France is a lot about auctions, and you really focus on sustainable plans which come at a cost. So how are you managing that?
Managing on which
managing to win such a tender if others don't do it.
It's not an easy way, and in particular in the context of extreme volatility. We just came through an inflation period, and those tenders are easier when you can plan and you can refer to the price before. So to be honest, it's very difficult for our financials now to fit the good numbers. Then, I mean, the framework of this tender is so detailed, so you just have to fit the requirement the best as possible. But at the same time, in this context also of volatility, I think that's make France, and we could see that with our last fundraising, France and European country, mostly France, very attractive for investors, thanks to this stable price for a very long period of time. It's difficult to find such a long period of time with fixed price through PPA. It's evolving because more and more corporates are interested about buying decarbonated energy. So the duration is increasing, but to have a fixed price over 20 years is very unique, and this stability is very important to attract investors, and also because in our economic model we use a lot of debt, and so commercial bank they need this visibility. Finance in general need visibility, predictability, to be secured and to invest. So tenders are a solution, but very strict. That's why we have this second market of power purchase agreement, more free market between two stakeholders, which is increasing and which is also a very good solution. I'm sorry because I really have to leave.
Okay, cool. Let's maybe one final question. We are really late. Because the question was, what can we do actually to, or what are the lessons learned from wind? So what are maybe the key points we have to avoid to actually see some slowdown that wind has experienced at a certain stage of its evolution? Maybe everyone, just some keywords.
I think I can start. I think, this is also why we are talking about this. Communication is everything. No? So you need to be transparent. And I think this is, let us be clear, I think in Europe it was very often a bit behind the scene developments of wind, and then the turbine was there and that's it. So I think everyone learned about it. And I think we have to work more harder about it. No? So all the associations, other groups, we need to be much more active.
Okay, Purnendu?
Yeah, so if you look at India's story, so there had been a lot of dependence on OEMs in India, especially in wind sector. And I've seen developers struggling during the O&M phase, right? Because now earlier OEMs, they were dictating the terms to developers, right? So that's something that we need to avoid in solar. And even there had been a lot of cutthroat competition in, I'm talking about India's story, in wind also, which later on they found to very difficult to make, which was not making economical sense as such. So avoiding very aggressive tenders also, just in the gist of winning projects during the reverse auction, etc. So that has become a challenge. And again, technological obsolescence, that repowering, etc., that is being talked in wind. So maybe that module, I don't know, because with the kind of developments that is taking in the field of module with new technologies, JP, TOPCon, etc. So all those kind of derating, etc., that can be minimized. So maybe these are a few things that we can learn from, not from only technology, but also from tendering point of view, from at least from the Indian perspective.
Super, thanks. Eva, final words to you.
I just concerning the comparison with wind. Of course, this is the renewables with the S, and all the renewable are important for the energy transition, and have to move together, not to compete, but to move together. Because we have to face oil and gas industry, which is very organized for a very long period of time, okay? And so renewable have to move together, but at the same times, we have to be careful because wind and solar, it's very different. And what makes renewables rich is the diversity of renewable. The installation is completely different. And if I'm back to my topic, which was environmental compliance and integration, a solar park and a wind park are completely different. The challenge are not the same. Okay, so at the same time we can learn from wind, and this is good, but at the same time solar is very flexible, very agile, can be integrated to a lot of different use. That's why we are pushing this dual use and this co-usage, okay? In rooftop, in solar park, solar can bring shade, and in a world where solar irradiation is decreasing, also in the agricultural sector, solar module can bring shade, and this is very valuable. So each of this energy has its own value, and can bring something to the society, and we should push on this.
Super, thanks a lot to the panel. I fully agree, and I think that was also why we had the presentation from Purnendu about hybrid systems. There it's really about working together and basically turning renewables into a more stable asset that can actually efficiently use grids, transmission points, and also provide services, ancillary services to the energy system. So thanks again to everyone. Just a few words from my side. Once again, thanks to the sponsors. Maybe I want to show the slides again, who made that possible. Next event, I think, or what else do we have? Yeah, these are our reports. You can download them for free. We come out tonight with a new one, actually, where we have 100 pages of new products that were presented during SNEC and Intersolar. You see the latest technology trends there. And our next event will be on the 26th of September. It will be about advanced module applications from BIPV to floating solar. So we will simply look at all the different needs for all these applications that module manufacturers have to look at. Thanks again to everyone. Have a nice
Thank you very much.
Evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.